Everything was still. She had been in this room for what felt like an eternity, though the concept of time had become meaningless here. The walls were smooth, cold, and alien, without any familiar markings or symbols. No windows, no doors, yet she knew they were always watching. The last thing she remembered from Earth was the cold night air brushing against her skin as she walked home. Then, nothing. Her life had been ripped from her in an instant, replaced by the suffocating silence of this prison. But she wasn't alone here. They were with her. They weren't human, not even close. She had only seen glimpses of them through the translucent walls. Tall, elongated figures, moving with a deliberate grace that felt unnatural. Their intentions became clear soon enough. They weren't just holding her. They needed her. As days stretched into weeks, a horrifying realization settled into her mind. They wanted to use her to create something new, something that blended their alien biology with her human form. But why? And more importantly, how long before they succeeded? The air felt heavier today, thick with an unseen pressure that made it hard for her to breathe. Her pulse quickened as the strange humming from the walls began again. She had learned to recognize it, a signal, a warning that they were coming. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in the silence of her cell. Every muscle in her body tensed as the walls began to shift, revealing a doorway that hadn't been there before. This time, they didn't stay hidden. They walked in, their elongated figures gliding through the dim light like shadows. There were two of them, the leaders, she assumed. They always moved with purpose, never hesitating. She wasn't sure when it had become clear, but now she knew. Today was the day. Their eyes, or what she assumed were their eyes, locked onto her, a deep intensity emanating from their featureless faces. One of them extended a hand, not quite human, but close enough that it felt unsettling. She knew what was coming, the reason they had kept her alive all this time. They wanted to bond, to melt their genetic makeup with hers, to force an evolution neither of them had asked for. A shiver ran down her spine as they approached, her body betraying her fear and confusion. She had fought this, resisted every step, but now the moment was upon her. Her mind raced, searching for a way out, but there was none. She had no weapons, no escape. Just the cold reality of what was about to happen. They closed the distance between them, and she could feel the heat radiating from their skin. Their presence was overwhelming, suffocating. One of them reached out, brushing against her arm, the touch unexpectedly warm and soft, a stark contrast to their imposing forms. For a brief second, her breath caught in her throat as the weight of the moment sank in. She wasn't sure if it was terror or something else, something unfamiliar, creeping through her veins. Their movements were deliberate, but slow, almost as if they were testing her, gauging her reactions. The first contact was like a spark, a jolt of energy that passed between them. It wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, primal, and undeniable. Her body reacted instinctively, drawn into their presence, despite her mind's desperate protests. Her mind was a battlefield, caught between the urge to escape and the undeniable pull of something beyond her understanding. The moment stretched on, each breath she took heavy with tension, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear and confusion. The alien figure's touch lingered, not harsh but invasive in a way she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just their physical presence that overwhelmed her, but the strange, almost hypnotic energy that seemed to surround them. They weren't just reaching for her body, they were reaching into her very essence. She could feel it, a subtle hum deep in her bones, like the resonance of a sound too low to hear but impossible to ignore. It stirred something within her, a primal connection she had no words for. Her body, despite her mind's frantic resistance, responded. The alien's hand slid down her arm, leaving a trail of warmth in its wake, and her skin tingled with the unfamiliar sensation. She should have been repulsed, terrified even, but there was something else, an inexplicable curiosity that gnawed at the edges of her consciousness. Her breath hitched as she met the creature's gaze, or what passed for it. There was no malice there, only purpose. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker, as if the very walls were closing in on her. Her pulse raced, but she couldn't move, her body frozen between fear and something else she couldn't name. The other alien moved closer, its form just a blur of shadows in the dim light. She felt a soft pressure at the back of her mind, not a voice exactly, but a presence, pushing, probing. This is what they want, she thought. To merge us, to create something new. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave, crashing through the fog of her thoughts. They weren't just using her for reproduction, they were blending, integrating her humanity with their alien biology. One of them leaned in, its breath warm against her neck, and she tensed. The sensation was overwhelming, her senses heightened to a point where every touch felt like fire on her skin. The physical boundary between them began to blur, her body reacting in ways she couldn't control. She could feel them, not just around her, but within her, like their very presence was rewriting the fabric of her being. A soft sound escaped her lips, a mix of confusion and surrender. Her mind screamed for her to fight, to resist, but her body was caught in the pull, drawn into their alien rhythm. The room seemed to pulse with energy, every movement synchronized, every touch deliberate. And then, in a moment that felt both eternal and instantaneous, the connection deepened. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, something far more intimate than she had ever experienced. She felt her thoughts entwining with theirs, her memories blending into a vast, alien consciousness. Her heart raced, but there was no going back now. They were one. When the moment passed, she lay there, suspended in the strange aftermath of their union. The room was quiet now, almost serene, but her mind was anything but. She could feel it, them inside her. They weren't just a presence hovering over her thoughts, they were part of her now, woven into the very fabric of her consciousness. Her body felt different, like it no longer solely belonged to her. Her senses were sharper, more attuned to the subtle vibrations of the alien environment. She could hear the faint hum of the ship's energy, the pulse of its systems, and even the soft, rhythmic breathing of the beings around her. But more than that, she could feel their emotions, their thoughts bleeding into hers like a quiet storm on the edge of her awareness. It wasn't just fear anymore. There was something else. Curiosity. Discovery. The overwhelming drive to survive, to evolve. Their purpose was clear now, and it coursed through her veins like electricity. They were trying to create something more than just life. They were trying to create a new species, one that combined their intellect and her humanity, their physical power and her emotional complexity. She wasn't just a vessel for their experiments, she was the key. The realization hit her like a shockwave, rippling through her mind. They hadn't chosen her by accident. She had been studied, analyzed, chosen for what made her unique. Her memories, her instincts, her ability to adapt, all of it had been part of their plan from the start. And now, she wasn't just their prisoner. She was their equal, or at least, she was becoming something close to it. But even as their thoughts merged with hers, a small, fragile part of her resisted. A part of her that still clung to the life she had known before, to the person she had been. She could feel it slipping away, like sand through her fingers, but she wasn't ready to let go. She sat up slowly, her movements more deliberate, more fluid than they had ever been before. Her body was still hers, but it moved differently, like the lines between her and them had blurred. She touched her own skin, feeling the warmth of it, but it no longer felt entirely familiar. The aliens stood nearby, watching her closely, their dark forms silhouetted against the faint glow of the ship's walls. They weren't speaking, but she could sense their anticipation, their quiet satisfaction. This was what they had wanted all along, a successful merging of two species, a new beginning. But what had she become? Was she still human? Or something else entirely? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but even that felt different now. Every emotion, every sensation was heightened, amplified by the connection they had forged. She felt powerful, yet vulnerable. In control, yet at their mercy. And as she met their gaze, something unexpected happened. She understood them. Not just their purpose, not just their plans, but their entire existence. Their history, their struggles, their desires, it all flowed into her like a tidal wave, overwhelming her senses, but not crushing her. She absorbed it, embraced it, and in that moment, she knew. She was no longer just a woman who had been taken from Earth. She was something far more significant, something that had the potential to change the future of both species. But at what cost? The weight of her realization settled in, a mix of clarity and dread washing over her. She wasn't just part of their experiment anymore, she was its culmination. The final piece in a puzzle that stretched across galaxies and lifetimes. Everything had led to this moment, and now, it was her turn to decide what came next. The aliens watched her, their unreadable faces betraying no emotion, but she could sense it, the anticipation, the careful calculation behind their every move. They had brought her here, shaped her into something new, but they hadn't predicted this. They hadn't anticipated that she would understand them so completely. That she would see the fragile cracks in their grand design. Her mind was clearer than it had ever been. She could feel the subtle changes within her, the merging of their thoughts with hers, but it wasn't all-consuming. She still had control, and in that, she found her power. She stood up, her movements smooth and deliberate, feeling the strength coursing through her limbs. The once unfamiliar space now felt almost like home, her heightened senses adapting to the alien ship as if it were a natural extension of herself. But the question lingered, what would she do with this newfound knowledge? With this new identity? The aliens stepped forward, their towering forms casting long shadows across the room. She could sense their curiosity, their silent command urging her to take the next step. This was what they had worked for, what they had wanted all along, a perfect union between their species and hers. But perfection had a cost. And she wasn't ready to pay it. She had seen too much, felt too much. Their history was now hers, their motives as transparent as the translucent walls of her cell. She understood their need to evolve, their desperation to survive. But in their pursuit of a new race, they had forgotten something crucial, the human spirit. The unyielding drive for freedom, for choice. And she still had a choice. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked at them, the air crackling with tension. They were waiting, expecting her to submit fully, to embrace the future they had designed for her. But as she stood there, a quiet resolve began to take shape within her. I won't be your tool, she thought, though the words echoed in their shared consciousness. For a moment, the aliens hesitated, uncertainty flickering through the bond they shared. They had never faced resistance like this, not from someone they had already integrated. But she was no ordinary human. She took a step forward, her voice steady, confident, as she spoke aloud for the first time in what felt like an eternity. You underestimated me, she said, her gaze piercing through them. I'm not just your creation. I am more than you ever imagined. The room seemed to vibrate with the weight of her words. The aliens shifted, their tall, slender forms rippling with energy, but they didn't move closer. They didn't need to. She could feel their collective tension, the silent understanding that something had changed. She was in control now. With a deep breath, she reached out, feeling the connection between them hum to life. The power coursing through her was undeniable, a fusion of their strength and her humanity, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She knew what she had to do. Closing her eyes, she focused on the link they shared, pushing against it, testing its boundaries. It resisted at first, a wall of alien thoughts and commands, but slowly, she felt it give way. She wasn't breaking the connection, she was reshaping it, bending it to her will. And as she did, she realized something extraordinary. She could control them. Their thoughts, their actions, all of it was within her grasp. They had wanted to create a new species, but in doing so, they had given her the ultimate power, the ability to rewrite their future. With a final surge of energy, she severed the bond, her mind now her own, yet still humming with the residual power of their connection. The aliens staggered, momentarily disoriented, but they didn't fall. Instead, they simply stood there, watching her with a newfound respect and maybe even fear. She turned toward the door, the path ahead clear. She wasn't sure what awaited her outside this room, outside this ship. But she knew one thing for certain, whatever came next, it would be on her terms. As she walked away, the silence of the room seemed to echo with possibility, with the birth of something entirely new. A future where humanity and alien kind were no longer enemies, but something more, something unknown,